Their morning routines for maximum productivity are often misunderstood as a checklist of habits to imitate, when in reality, they are the visible surface of a much deeper internal order that has been carefully constructed over years of trial failure and self-observation. Financial giants do not wake up early because early rising is fashionable, nor do they meditate, exercise, or read because productivity gurus told them to. They design their mornings as a deliberate buffer between the chaos of the external world and the clarity required for long-term decision-making. The morning for them is not about doing more, but about protecting the quality of their thinking before it is contaminated by noise, urgency, and other people's priorities. What immediately stands out when studying these individuals is the absence of rush. While many entrepreneurs begin their day already reacting, emails, messages, market movements, financial giants begin by reclaiming ownership of their attention. They understand that attention is the rarest form of capital, and once spent poorly in the morning, it cannot be fully recovered later. This is why their routines emphasize slowness, intentionality, and repetition. The goal is not stimulation, but calibration, aligning the mind with reality before engaging with complexity. In this sense, the morning becomes a form of mental governance, setting the tone for every decision that follows. A common thread among them is physical grounding. Some walk long distances, others stretch, lift weights, or practice controlled breathing, but the purpose is consistent: to reconnect the mind with the body. Financial giants learned early that fatigue, tension, and neglected health distort judgment far more than a lack of information. By engaging the body first, they stabilize emotions and reduce the likelihood of impulsive reactions later in the day. This physical ritual is not about aesthetics or performance, but about maintaining a baseline of internal order from which rational thought can emerge. Silence also plays a central role. Many of these individuals intentionally spend the first portion of their morning without consuming external information. No news, no social media, no market commentary. They recognize that most information is reactive by nature, designed to provoke emotion rather than understanding. By delaying exposure, they preserve the purity of their own thinking, allowing insights formed over months or years to surface without interference. In this quiet space, they often reflect on first principles, revisiting core assumptions about their businesses, investments, and life priorities, not to change them daily, but to keep them alive and conscious. Reading when it occurs is rarely random. Financial giants read slowly, selectively, and often repeatedly. They return to foundational texts, history, philosophy, biographies, and deep analyses rather than chasing novelty. Morning reading is used not to acquire facts, but to sharpen judgment, to remind themselves how similar patterns have played out across time. This practice reinforces humility, placing current challenges within a broader context and reducing the emotional intensity of short-term fluctuations. By anchoring themselves in long arcs of history, they immunize their thinking against the anxiety of daily volatility. Another defining characteristic of their morning routine is deliberate isolation. This is the time when they are least accessible, even to those closest to them professionally. Financial giants fiercely protect this boundary because they understand that creativity and strategic clarity require solitude. Decisions that move capital, shape organizations, or influence markets cannot be made in a fragmented state. The morning is reserved for thinking that cannot be outsourced, delegated, or rushed. It is here that they examine unresolved questions, reassess risks, and quietly test their own assumptions before the world demands answers. Planning, when done, is minimalist and principle-driven. Rather than constructing exhaustive to-do lists, They identify a small number of priorities that truly matter. They ask themselves what decisions or actions, if handled correctly today, will make many other tasks easier or irrelevant. This reflects their bias toward leverage, not effort. By aligning their day around a few high-impact intentions, they avoid the trap of busyness masquerading as productivity. The morning, therefore, becomes a filter, eliminating the trivial before it has a chance to consume valuable energy. Importantly, their routines are remarkably stable. While circumstances change, the structure remains consistent. This stability reduces decision fatigue and preserves cognitive resources for matters that genuinely require creativity and judgment. Financial giants do not experiment endlessly with their mornings. Once a routine proves effective, it becomes almost sacred. This repetition is not rigidity, but a recognition that excellence is built on dependable foundations rather than constant optimization. The routine itself becomes a psychological anchor, signaling to the mind that it is time for clarity, restraint, and long-term thinking. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of these morning routines is what they exclude. There is little urgency, little multitasking, and almost no reactive behavior. Financial giants intentionally delay engagement with crises unless truly unavoidable, knowing that most urgent matters resolve themselves or look different after thoughtful consideration. By refusing to surrender the morning to external pressures, they assert a quiet form of sovereignty over their time and attention. This sovereignty compounds over years, manifesting as superior judgment and emotional resilience. Ultimately, their morning routines are not about maximizing output, but about minimizing error. They understand that one poor decision can undo months of disciplined effort, while a single, well-timed insight can create disproportionate value. The morning is where they reduce the probability of mistakes by aligning mind, body, and perspective before stepping into uncertainty. It is a daily act of respect for the power they wield and the consequences of misusing it. For those observing from the outside, these routines may seem simple, even unimpressive, but simplicity is deceptive. What appears minimal is supported by deep self-knowledge and unwavering discipline. The true lesson is not to copy the specific habits, but to understand the intention behind them, to create a mental environment where long-term thinking can survive in a world optimized for distraction. And it is precisely here, at the point, where most people are tempted to turn these insights into another productivity formula, that the real difference emerges, because financial giants do not ask how to add more to their mornings, but how to remove everything that interferes with clear judgment. And once this question is taken seriously, the routine stops being a set of actions and starts becoming a reflection of identity values and an uncompromising respect for the quality of one's own thinking, which is why the morning in their world is not a time slot, but a discipline, one that quietly shapes every outcome that follows. And it is at this moment, when the routine evolves from habit into principle, that we must continue, because what happens next is not about what they do when the day begins, but about how this morning discipline reshapes their entire relationship with work time and decision-making, and how that shift ultimately determines whether productivity becomes a source of freedom or another form of subtle enslavement. As the thought continues and the deeper implications begin to unfold, leading us forward into the next part, where this unfinished idea carries on into a fuller understanding of how disciplined mornings quietly construct extraordinary lives, as the sentence now moves onward into part 2 without pause, because the logic of this transformation demands continuity, and the story itself insists on being completed as we follow it forward. From exactly this point, where the idea remains deliberately open, waiting to be carried further as the exploration continues and the sentence flows onward, inviting us to step into what comes next. As we continue seamlessly into the next phase of this reflection, where the true power of morning routines reveals itself, not as a productivity trick, but as a long-term strategy for mastery, responsibility, and enduring clarity. And it is precisely from here that the continuation must begin as the thought carries forward into the next part, without repetition, without interruption, and without losing the rhythm that has brought us to this point. Because the next insight depends entirely on what has just been left unresolved. And so the sentence continues, and this is where the deeper consequence of those mornings begins to reveal itself. Because once the mind is trained each day to operate from clarity rather than urgency, the entire architecture of work starts to reorganize around a different center of gravity. Financial giants do not use their mornings to squeeze more hours out of the day. They use them to decide which hours should never be spent at all. Over time, this discipline produces a radical filtering effect. Meetings shrink, commitments thin out, and only problems worthy of first-rate attention are allowed to survive. Productivity in this context stops being about speed and becomes about precision, the precision to engage deeply with a few essential matters, while letting 1,000 distractions dissolve without guilt. As this pattern compounds, something subtle but powerful occurs. Decision latency decreases, while decision quality increases. Because their mornings are spent revisiting principles, assumptions, and long-term objectives, financial giants enter the day already pre-aligned. When opportunities or crises appear, they do not need to scramble for perspective. It is already present. This is why they often seem calm in moments that paralyze others. The calm is not personality. It is preparation. The morning routine has already rehearsed the mental posture required to face uncertainty, making decisive action feel natural rather than forced. Another transformation follows quietly. Time begins to feel abundant, not because there is less to do, but because fewer things demand emotional energy. By starting each day grounded and intentional, financial giants reduce the internal friction that exhausts most people. They are not constantly negotiating with themselves, not endlessly switching contexts, not battling the residue of poorly spent attention. This conservation of mental energy allows them to sustain high-level thinking for decades, which is the real competitive advantage. Many can sprint for a year or two. Very few can maintain clarity for a lifetime. Over years, the morning routine also reshapes identity. When you repeatedly begin your day by honoring your highest priorities rather than your loudest obligations, you send a powerful signal to yourself about who is in control. This builds quiet confidence, not the loud kind that seeks affirmation, but the steady kind that resists pressure. Financial giants become difficult to manipulate, not because they are stubborn, but because their internal compass is recalibrated daily. They know what matters before anyone tells them what should matter. Eventually, this discipline extends beyond work into life itself. Relationships improve because presence improves. Health stabilizes because stress is addressed before it accumulates. Even ambition matures, shifting from restless expansion to deliberate contribution. The morning routine, once a tool for productivity, becomes a ritual of alignment, ensuring that power, responsibility, and intention remain synchronized. This is why copying the surface habits rarely works. Without the underlying respect for attention, time, and consequence, the routine collapses into performance rather than practice. In the end, the true lesson of their morning routines is not about waking up early, meditating longer, or planning better. It is about treating the first hours of consciousness as sacred ground, a space where the direction of the entire day, and eventually an entire life, is quietly set. Financial giants understand that the world will always demand reaction, But mastery begins with choosing response. By defending the morning, they defend the quality of their thinking. And by defending their thinking, they protect everything that follows from it. And so the story resolves simply. Extraordinary productivity is not built by doing more, but by thinking better. And thinking better begins before the noise arrives. Those who learn this stop asking how to optimize their schedule and start asking how to honor their attention. When that shift occurs, mornings cease to be routines and become foundations. Foundations upon which enduring clarity, disciplined action, and long-term impact are constructed one quiet morning at a time. If this perspective has changed how you see productivity and self-mastery, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and continue this journey of long-term thinking together. And leave a comment sharing which insight about mornings or attention struck you most. Because reflection turns ideas into principles, and principles repeated daily are what quietly separate those who stay busy from those who build something that lasts.